Hey, it's the Heretic Chick, and I'm heretic because I believe that Jesus already came back. I'm just gonna throw that out there right now. So, yeah, that's pretty crazy. I know. So, if you're wondering how someone could be so crazy, then you could listen to what I have to say, and then maybe you'll know. And turns out I'm not the only one that believes this. There are some other crazy people out there. You might encounter them. So maybe you'll want to listen to this just so, you kind of know what to expect. Or maybe you'll be shocked by what you learn. Because Jesus did say, when they asked him about his coming, he said it would be, quote, I'm quoting Jesus here, in this generation. He also said, he would be coming in his kingdom before some standing here, 2,000 years ago here, taste death. Meaning before some of those people 2,000 years ago die, he said he'd be coming back. So as crazy as you think I am, and as crazy as I would have thought I am before I started looking into this, we do at least have to give a little bit of credibility to Jesus, don't you think? We should, think about what he said at least a little bit, at least consider it. I mean, they are the words of Jesus. I know, he might not be the early church fathers, although, I mean, really, wouldn't he be the earliest church father? I mean, honestly, but you know what I mean. So we're going to dig into this because there's a conflict here. We have been completely misled, I believe, about the second coming. And I think there's another explanation that doesn't make you have to twist the meaning, the definition of words all around, and it doesn't turn Jesus into a confused person or a false prophet. So let's examine it. And you know what? If you don't like it, you don't have to accept it. You don't have to believe it. I'm just giving you all the options, okay? It's always good to explore the options. So we have been going through Gary DeMar's book, Wars and Rumors of Wars, and Gary makes some compelling arguments that a lot of these things have already happened. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before. A lot of people believe that some of these things have been fulfilled. Maybe a few of them, some of them, almost all of them, So what is the evidence for this, and how many of these things have been fulfilled? Well, that's what we're discussing. And today we're going to discuss the gathering of eagles, sun, moon, stars, and the powers of the heavens. These are some of the signs, relating to some of the signs that Jesus gave in his Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. So let's jump right in. This is Matthew 24:28. Wherever the corpse is, there the eagles will gather. Or some versions might say the vultures will gather. Now, I don't know about you, but I had heard this verse before. I always thought it was this thing that's going to happen in the future during this great tribulation. But what does this mean, okay, about corpses and vultures gathering? Well, let's look at the Old Testament. The best way to understand the New Testament, oops, sorry about that, is to look at the Old Testament. So consider, this is Gary DeMar, consider the language of Deuteronomy 28:49 through 53. Okay. In Deuteronomy 28, it's when Moses gives the curses for disobedience of the covenant that had been established at Sinai. And I don't know if you've read through the curses. I highly recommend you do it because it's like worse than any horror movie you could ever imagine. It's awful. I mean, these curses are just over the top. One of the curses is, this is the one that I laughed at when I read it. It says, the itch of which you cannot be cured. He will send you the itch of which you cannot be cured. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little funny story. This one hit home to me when I read that because when I was in college, I had what I called itchy leg disease. And my legs just itched all the time so bad, to the point where I had like scabs all over my legs. And I went to the local like university doctor, which I wouldn't recommend doing that anymore because I'm not sure they have, that much experience. But anyway, I went, and this young, I don't think he was even probably a doctor yet, but he put on these like goggle things, and he was like looking at my legs under these magnifying glasses, and he told me that I definitely had scabies, and that is why my legs itched. And the treatment for scabies, I don't even remember if he gave me like a cream or something to rub on my legs, but I had to go home and like sanitize and wash every single thing I owned, including like, we were supposed to have our couch cleaned. I lived with my brother at the time, so now he's super annoyed because he thinks that I have brought scabies into our apartment, and we're washing all the bedding, the curtains, the carpet, like everything. We're just trying to get rid of these scabies. And I went home, and my mom's a nurse. And when I told my mom what the doctor had said, she just laughed and she said, "You do not have scabies." And turns out I went to the dermatologist, and basically I think I just had like dry skin is all it was. But this dry skin, maybe it's like eczema or something. It recurrent. It was hard to get rid of it. And I battled that for years, and it itched. Remember, we're talking about the itch from which you cannot be cured, okay? And I went, or one night, it was so bad, and my husband, he works construction, and I begged him, this is so funny, I can't believe he did this. I begged him to go get his sander, like a little circular sander thing, and he said no, like that would hurt, but I knew it would feel so good. And so he brought the sander in, and he sanded my legs, and it felt amazing while he was doing it. I mean, but then as soon as the sander turns off, it still itched, and then it was bad because my legs just, like, all the skin fell off, and I just had scab legs for a month. But okay, the point, what were we talking about here? Sanding legs. The point is this idea of wherever the corpse is, there the eagles will gather. It's the same language of Deuteronomy, the same passage of where we get the itch that cannot be cured. We have, your carcasses will be food to all the birds of the sky. Okay? He's telling them what's going to happen to them if they don't obey the law. Your carcasses will be food to all the birds of the sky. Jeremiah said the same thing. This is in Jeremiah chapter 7. The dead bodies of this people will be food for the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth. This is judgment language. Notice, now this is going to be really interesting. So Jeremiah is using the same language as Jesus about the birds feasting on their corpses. And he says, Gary DeMar points out, remember what Jesus said, or remember what Jeremiah said. He said, amend your ways and your deeds, and I will let you dwell in this place, meaning Jerusalem. Okay, Jeremiah said to the Jews, amend your ways and your deeds, and I will let you dwell in this place. But then, without obedience, the temple had become a den of robbers. That's Jeremiah 7:11. A den of robbers. Compare with Matthew 21:13. I think we all know what that passage says. So it's the exact same language of judgment on a nation, okay, for disobedience. Corpses, vultures. Why? Because the Jews, the temple, the old covenant system had become a den of robbers. I mean, think about what the Jews of Jesus' day, what the scribes and the Pharisees must have thought about Jesus completely commandeering the language of Jeremiah and saying, you have made my father's house a den of robbers. I guarantee they recognized where he was pulling that from, who he was pulling that from Jeremiah, who prophesied destruction of Jerusalem. And you know what happened? The Babylonians came in Jeremiah's day and destroyed Jerusalem. And the people were exiled to Babylon, and the temple was destroyed. So when Jesus comes into town, after they've come back to their land, the temple has been rebuilt, and he says, you have turned my father's house into a den of robbers, and the vultures are going to feast on your flesh. Where the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Don't you think the people, the scribes and the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they recognized that Jesus was prophesying the destruction of their city and their temple, and that he was telling them it's your fault because you have forsaken the covenant? I don't know. I found that so fascinating. I didn't realize that Jeremiah had said that. When we talk about vultures, you know, what attracts a vulture? It's the smell of rotting corpses. And Josephus records that there were over 1 million deaths in Jerusalem during this last phase of the war with Rome. The siege was only like 5.5 months, I think. 1.1 million dead bodies. I mean, that doesn't even include any Roman deaths. And Josephus records how the bodies just were piling up in heaps everywhere, and that the stench was so horrible that it actually prevented them from going to battle with the Romans. I mean, imagine a smell so bad that you can't even go to battle with your enemy. You're willing to almost let the enemy conquer you because you can't get past the smell. So yeah, there probably were a lot of vultures. Okay, so could that have happened in the first century? Check, yes. Okay, Matthew 24:29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. This is a big one here. People say there's absolutely no way this already happened. Okay, you're never going to convince me that the stars fell from the sky, the sun was darkened, the moon didn't give its light. There's just no way. Obviously, that didn't happen. But we have to remember, well, okay, let me also point out that what people do, because they can't get past some of the other fulfillments we've pointed out, like, for example, Jesus said there would be famines, and then we read about the famines in the New Testament. He talks about false prophets. We read about false prophets in the New Testament. He talks about the abomination of desolation, which I know might shock you to hear that that already happened, but Luke calls it, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know its desolation is near. So this thing that caused the desolation, whatever it was, Luke says it would be when Jerusalem was surrounded by armies. I mean, Luke didn't say that. Jesus said that. It's recorded in Luke. So Jesus said the abomination of desolation would be when Jerusalem was surrounded by armies, which happened in the first century. And keep in mind, Jesus did say all these things would happen in, quote, this generation 2,000 years ago. So, but, so what some people do is, and I didn't realize that people tried to do this till I heard my own pastor do it. They admit, maybe you're one of these people. I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. I'm just explaining the different ways people try to explain Jesus. So they understand, they can't deny that some of these things have already been fulfilled. And so when they get to a certain one, and a lot of times it's this one, the sun and the moon part, they just draw a line and they say, insert gap. Gap. It's the gap fix. It fixes every problem. You know, you got a problem in Daniel? Gap. Got a problem in Matthew 24? Gap. Anywhere you need it, just throw a gap in there. I don't know about you, but that doesn't really sit very well with me. I feel like somebody's trying to pull the wool over my eyes, you know? What kind of prophet prophesies something and then you have to like insert 2,000 year gap because this didn't actually happen the way I said it would. But that's what some people do. So they insert a gap here at this part about the sun and the moon because they can't imagine it happened. And listen to what he says. So he's talking about this guy, D.A. Carson, who is a gap proponent, apparently. But it says he comes to his conclusion, even though he argues that, quote, so now we're quoting D.A. Carson, this generation, remember, Jesus said all these things would happen in this generation. He says, this generation can only with the greatest difficulty be made to mean anything other than the generation living when Jesus spoke. So I guess he's willing to make the great difficulty to change the meaning of this generation. But it's important to see that verse, this is Gary talking now, Gary DeMar. It's important to see that verse 29 begins with, but immediately after the tribulation of those days. Okay, so how are you going to put a gap in there when it says immediately after, then this is going to happen? And if you're saying in your head, there was no tribulation, that's in our future, well, I'm sorry, but the apostles thought it was in their present. I mean, John said, I am a fellow sufferer with you in the tribulation. The writer of Hebrews said they were in the last days. The book of Acts chapter 2 says they were living in the last days. So, you know, tribulation, according to the apostles and Jesus, was 2,000 years ago. But anyway, and immediately after that would be these signs that we're talking about. So it's going to be hard to insert a gap. But is that, when it talks about the stars falling, is that really what it means? Okay, I'm going to quote Gary here. Jesus' disciples did not inquire about the end of the world, cosmos. That's the Greek word for world, or one of the Greek words that's translated as world. Keep that in mind. That might be news to you. It was also news to me. I always thought they asked Jesus, give us some signs. When is it going to be the end of the world? They asked about the end of the covenant age. When the tribulation of those days, the tribulation that marked the end of the covenant age, was completed, the religious and political structure as a covenant nation came to an end before that first century generation passed away. Okay, so he's saying this tribulation came to an end in the first century. Even futurists do not see Matthew 24:29 as being descriptive of the end of the world, since a 1,000-year earthly millennium is said to follow immediately after their future version of the Great Tribulation. So I didn't know that, but they don't see it as the end of the world. So even if you're a futurist, if you thought this was talking about the end of the world, I guess nobody agrees with you. You don't have any friends left, because even if you believe all these things are in the future, it's not the end of the world, because we still have to keep the world so we can have the 1,000-year millennium. So that's interesting. Okay. So, okay, good question now. So when did this happen? Tell me, prove to me, crazy lady, how the sun went dark and the moon and the stars fell from heaven. Okay, well, let's think about this. This stars falling from heaven. I don't know why. This just shows how ignorant I am, because I knew what we're told about how big a star is. And if one star, like our sun, they say, I mean, I'm just gonna go by traditional cosmology here, people, okay? So if the sun fell to the earth, it would engulf, it's way, 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 way bigger than the earth, right? So That's only one, and the sun isn't even supposedly the biggest star. And how could it even really fall? I mean, it's gas. I feel like we'd be sucked into it according to the theory of gravity, right? It couldn't fall onto us. We would be more like we fell onto it. But how could we fall onto all the stars then? That doesn't make any sense. So something's going on. And, people say, oh, okay, well, it's meteors. Okay, it says all the stars will fall, right? All the stars will fall from heaven. So if we're talking about meteors, that wouldn't work either, because they claim that one meteor is what, took out all the dinosaurs. So imagine all the meteorites. I don't really know the difference there, but all of them falling onto the earth. There's not going to be anything left. I mean, it's not even possible. So that can't be. So what's going on here? So if we want to figure out the meaning of this, the best way, again, is to look at the Old Testament usage of these words. And Gary's going to point out in this book that we're studying here. Did I already mention this? Wars and Rumors of Wars? I don't know. I'm losing track of time here, but chapter 8 we're on right here. That these stars and the sun and the moon represent governments, governors, dominions, and political states. Okay, let me prove my point, because I know that sounds crazy, but the one that I really like to think of is, and I don't even know if you used this one in the book, but Joseph. And for those of you who already know this, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say it again really quickly. Joseph has a dream. Remember Joseph's dream? The sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. And his father says to him, how dare you say that your mother and I and your 11 brothers are going to bow down to you? His father instantly understood what was meant by the sun and the moon and the stars, okay? They represent leadership. And it's symbolic of Israel or other nations. Let's look at some other verses. For example, this is Isaiah chapter 13. It says, the oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, cruel with fury and burning anger, to make the land a desolation, and he will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Isaiah is describing the destruction of Babylon, this actual historical event that happened, but it had nothing to do with actual stars or the sun or the moon, okay? It meant that the powers of Babylon were removed, okay? Babylon fell. The same thing in Ezekiel 32, which is a judgment on Egypt. It says, and when I extinguish you, I will cover the heavens and darken their stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light. All the shining lights in the heavens I will darken over you, and I will set darkness on your land when I make the land of Egypt a desolation. Okay? So same language, but it wasn't, literal stars falling to the earth. And, the other thing, if the sun went dark, I used to worry about this. It's funny. If the sun went dark, I think our planet would turn to ice pretty quickly, if there was no light from the sun warming us. So it really makes no sense if we try to take it literally. But in the Old Testament, these signs in the heavens, the sun and the moon and stars, is always figurative, typical figurative Hebraic language, meaning nations, governments, rulers, authorities. He means your leaders, your authorities are going to be crushed, okay? It's a judgment on a nation. And in this case, when Jesus said that, who is he talking to? He's talking to the Jews, the scribes, the Pharisees, and he's talking specifically about their temple. Remember, he had just told them, behold, your house is left to you desolate. What was their house? It was the temple. He's talking about the destruction of the temple, which happened 40 years later. I don't know if you knew that. I didn't know that until I started looking into these things. They don't teach you these things in church. It's like they don't want you to know. But so I don't know. I feel like this is pretty easy to understand. We have, this is Isaiah 34. All their hosts will also wither away as a leaf withers from the vine. For my sword is satiated in heaven. Behold, it shall descend for judgment upon Edom. Okay, same type of language. And then we have Peter quoting Joel. It says, the sun will be darkened, or the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and glorious day of the Lord. He's not predicting that the moon will physically turn to blood. Okay, this is in Acts chapter 2. He's not predicting that the moon will turn to blood. And then he talks about Jim Jordan and his explanation about how this was pointing to the Jewish sacrificial system. You know, the moon representing their priesthood and how they had rejected the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus, and now they were going to pay with their lives because their old covenant that they were clinging so desperately to was about to come to an end. In 70 AD, when the Romans came in, they completely destroyed the city, destroyed the temple, burned it to the ground, and that was the end. And this is the language that Jesus is using. It's not about the physical cosmos, Gary says. It's about the political cosmos. In Revelation chapter 6, we find the following. The stars of the sky fell to the earth as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. This is the same type of language that Jesus is using in the Olivet Discourse. He's talking about a political upheaval. And the people, keep in mind, the people of his day understood it. It was common. They memorized the Old Testament, huge portions, if not all of it. They just memorized it. This language, it's like saying, you know, you hit the nail on the head. You understand that I'm not talking about carpentry here, okay? Same thing with them. They didn't have to wonder about what Jesus was talking about. They instantly knew what Jesus is talking about. And when we look at the context of these words, okay, the context is he's talking to them, right? Remember what Jesus said as he made his way to the cross? He said, daughters of Jerusalem, stop weeping for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Why was he telling them that? I mean, he was telling them that because he knew that they had this destruction coming in their future. They weren't going to be weeping for us 2,000 years in the future. Okay, this destruction was coming on them. He was talking to them. And when he is giving his Olivet Discourse, he's talking to people living at that time 2,000 years ago. Okay, they were going to witness these events. It's the same exact thing when he talks about the powers of the heavens. It's a power struggle. It's the struggle of the religious and secular powers of the day. It's the struggle of the old covenant versus the new covenant. Remember in the book of Hebrews, right? The whole book of Hebrews is like this contrast between the old covenant and the new covenant. And there's like we could call it one heaven and earth, which is the old covenant. It's this old system. And then there's this new thing, right? And he says, this first thing can be shaken, it can be removed, but it's going to be replaced by this thing that cannot be shaken, right? The powers of the heavens were about to be shaken, Jesus said. He said that was going to happen in this generation 2,000 years ago. The powers of the heavens were going to be shaken. That was the powers of the old covenant, the religious leaders of this old covenant law. This whole sacrificial system was about to be shaken and removed. But the book of Hebrews says, but this thing that was about to be removed was going to be replaced with this thing that could not be shaken. It could not be removed. And what was that? It was the new covenant. It is the new covenant. This has happened. Unless you think that we're still living under the old covenant. I mean, if the heavens haven't been shaken, then we're still living under the old covenant, according to the book of Hebrews, because this is the language of the book of Hebrews, right? The Jews, they called their temple, their sacrificial system, Jerusalem, they called it heaven and earth. Heaven and earth. It was their heavens on earth. It was where God dwelt with man. That's why they called it heaven and earth, because it's literally where they believed the presence of God dwelt with them. And that was about to be shaken. The heavens were about to be shaken and replaced with something that could not be shaken, the new covenant. The created things of the temple, animal sacrifices, and a sinful priesthood were part of a temporary covenant that was designed to pass away with the coming of Jesus, who tabernacled among us. This is Gary on page 135 of Wars and Rumors of Wars. We have now, we're not waiting for this in the future, we have now received a kingdom which cannot be shaken because it's made of permanent things. Those who contend that all the temporary things of the old covenant will one day be reestablished. Oh, did you know that there's people that believe this? I guess I did. I was one of these people. I was always told that the temple will be rebuilt in the future in Jerusalem. Do you know why people believe that the temple will be rebuilt in Jerusalem? It's because they believe that all these things that Jesus was talking about haven't happened yet. So since that temple that existed in Jesus's day has been destroyed, and they don't really believe Jesus when he said it was going to happen in his generation 2,000 years ago. So now we have to resurrect a new temple so that we can destroy the new temple. I never knew that. I didn't know why people believed that we had to build another temple. But truly, that's why. So he says, those who contend that all the temporary things of the old covenant will one day be reestablished contradict what the Bible explicitly states. They claim that during the 1,000-year period mentioned in Revelation 20, that there will be a new temple that includes animal sacrifices and circumcision of its worshipers. Did you know this? I didn't know. I mean, I had heard that we're gonna rebuild a temple. I don't think I really knew that they plan to sacrifice animals in this new temple, and they look forward to that. And you'll have to be circumcised. These impermanent elements were shaken by the redemptive work of Jesus and are an affront to the gospel. They are an affront to the gospel. Okay, so when Jesus said, let's go back. When he said, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Even the way he says it, the powers of the heavens, it really, when you think about it, it makes it clear he's not talking about the actual literal sun, moon, and stars here. He's talking about people, the people running the system, okay? They were about to be shaken and removed and replaced with this new covenant. And boy, aren't we glad that he did that. Yeah, it says here, it says dispensationalism requires that animal sacrifices for atonement must also be reinstituted. Animal sacrifices for atonement must also be reinstituted. Wouldn't that be trampling on the blood of Christ? Wouldn't that be a big step backwards? I think I was listening to Gary, and he said that, you know, Kirk Cameron, who was part of all those Left Behind movies, which actually I never even watched them. Somehow I missed them. But Kirk Cameron caught some of Gary DeMar's teaching on these topics, and he was tracking right with him and saying, wow, I can't believe it. Some of these things, they've all been fulfilled. But when he got to this, the passage about the sun, moon, and stars and the heavens being shaken, he said, there's no way you'll convince me of this. And then when Gary showed him these things, the Old Testament passages that refer to the sun, moon, and stars, but they're not talking about the cosmos. They're talking about political powers. And when he talked about the heavens being shaken in the book of Hebrews and a new heavens that couldn't be shaken, and how that's the new covenant, Kirk Cameron, he said he was blown away by it. And I think that's really neat to think about someone who, you know, could really do a 180 on what you've believed and what you've, in a way, taught. I mean, if you star in these movies, you're kind of teaching people something. So anyway, I don't know. What do you think about that? Is that surprising to you? I mean, it's shocking, I think, but it's not difficult at all to show it. I mean, just look at Joseph, the sun and the moon and the stars. It didn't mean, you know, little lights up there in the sky. That's not what he was talking about. So, okay, well, that was chapter 8, and we only have chapters 9 and 10 to cover, which I've already finished the book, so all I have to do is make the videos. And then today, I don't know when I'm going to release this video. I'm trying to get a little ahead, but today is, what is today? Tuesday. And Thursday is my book club meeting. All my girlfriends are coming over. So I'm really dying to see what they say about this, because they're all dispensational. They were raised dispensational. And so they would be just like what this was saying, that they would believe that we have to build a third temple in Jerusalem. And wow, this book is really going to, I don't know, maybe they'll hate it. Maybe they won't be able to accept any of it. But I've been learning a lot, even just rereading it again. So, okay. I don't know. Should I tell you my funny Christmas stories in this video? I mean, it was kind of a short one, so I guess I could. I promised you in my other video that I would, and then I didn't, so now I feel kind of bad. So, I don't know. I don't know if now's the right time. I have to go outside and I have to clean some horse stalls because my family left me for a couple days. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Hopefully there's no axe murderers out there. But, well, you've seen my dog, so I'm not too worried about it. So I really should probably go clean the horse stalls. But maybe after that I can just tell you my funny Christmas stories in a separate video. That might be better, because this one's already getting pretty long. But I hope you guys had a great Christmas, and ready for the new year. Can't believe it, but happens every year. Okay, that's all.